Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Kent Boucher and Nicolas Lirio of Hoksey Native Seeds and the Prairie Farm podcast to discuss exactly why native prairie grasses and forbs and wildflowers are so beneficial to whitetail deer and wildlife of all types, and exactly how we can get more of that kind of habitat on the ground. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. Today in the show, we are talking prairie. We are discussing why native prairie ecosystems are so powerful for wildlife of all types, how they can specifically help you as a whitetail deer hunter, and a whole lot more. My guests today, as I mentioned at the top, are the driving forces behind Hoksey Native Seeds, and they're the co-hosts of the Prairie Farm podcast, Kent Boucher and Nicolas Lirio. These guys are hands-on experts when it comes to native prairie habitat. And given their experience running Hoksey Native Seeds, it's a company that develops and sells native seed blends. They have this very, personal experience with prairie habitat, with, putting this stuff on the ground. But then they also have this very interesting kind of zoomed out perspective as hosts of the Prairie Farm podcast, because what they do on that show is they speak to all sorts of experts around the country and in the world about, prairie ecosystems, about how all this impacts wildlife of all types. Sometimes it's upland birds, sometimes it's turkeys, sometimes it's deer. They're speaking to people about broader farm-related issues, conservation-related issues. And so by way of all of these interviews, and then also that hands-on experience working with native seeds and native prairie ecosystems, they have this kind of like down in the dirt experience, but then up in the clouds understanding of how it all applies to things that are relevant to us. So for that reason, I'm thrilled to have these guys on the show. They're also just very likable. So they're fun to chat with, they're fun to listen to. We explore these two simple topics when you drill it right down. Number one, why should deer hunters care about prairie habitat? And number two, if we believe that prairie habitat is important, then how do we get about getting some of this on the ground in our neck of the woods? That's it. To sum it all up as simply as I possibly can, that is the conversation today. And so with that, let's just kick it to my conversation with Kent and Nick. Enjoy. All right. With me now on the line is Nicolas Lirio and Kent Boucher. Thank you guys for being here today.
Yeah, happy to be here, Mark.
I'm glad this is happening. You guys had me on your show about a year ago, and I really enjoyed that conversation that we had. Your podcast and the stuff you guys have been doing has been recommended to me by a number of people over the years. And so once I kind of connected the dots between Kent, who, I had chatted with you years before that, I guess on, about first gen hunter kind of things, I think, right?
Yep, that's right.
And it's all kind of circled back to where we are now. You both have been doing really, really cool work, and I've just been slow to recognize the relevance and the overlap with what so many of us deer hunters are thinking about, especially these days. So that is my typical long-winded Mark Kenyon way of saying I'm very interested in what you have to say to this first question, which is kind of getting right to the heart of this whole conversation. What I want to know is, why in the world should a deer hunter care about prairies? Why is that something? Why would wildflowers and native grasses and forbs in any way whatsoever be of interest or relevance to someone like me or our listeners who likes to get out there and shoot deer? Kent, you're a deer hunter yourself. Do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I'd love to, and just really appreciate you having us on the show. And I got to say, one of the people that I know recommended our show to you because he told me so. Just sent me this jealousy-inducing picture of a giant shed he picked up this morning with his son. He said, "I hope you're not working today."
I saw that same picture.
Yeah, that was a dandy. But
man, one day I was talking to Ken, and he was a little grumpy. He was in the field. He was planting someone else's field. It was very bumpy, And then I'm not kidding. I mean, he was kind of having a rough day. An hour later, he calls me, I just found my first shed of the season. His day made. Just one little shed he found in the field.
That does
was
help.
That was enough to make his day.
It will make a
that
day.
really helps.
But ironically, this story can kind of answer your question, Mark. I was planting a prairie, as Nick tells in that story, and actually, I didn't call him an hour later. He was still on the phone with me during my grumpy rant, and I had to stop the tractor to scoop that shed up. But when you think of Iowa, where we have cornfields and bean fields, which is roughly 30 million acres of our 36 and some change million acres of surface area in our state, that would have largely been prairie. Not all of it. Of course, there would have been some wetlands in there that we've drained. There'd be forests in different spots that we have. And even some of the areas that we would classify as prairie would have been more of an oak savanna area. But I mean, for simple displacement, it's largely just been that. We got rid of prairie and we put in corn and beans. And to be honest with the story, and I probably actually learned this little fact off your podcast years ago, Mark, but we know that today we have more deer in North America than when Chris Columbus made his way over here. And so deer have benefited from just a population standpoint. They have benefited from land development for sure. However, they existed here long before we developed that land, and they were thriving in our vast prairie ecosystems that we had here in Iowa, and not just in Iowa, all throughout the Midwest and different regions of what we normally consider to be prairie areas. I know you've done some whitetail hunting, man, all over this country, and I've had the privilege to do a little bit in places like Nebraska, where western Nebraska, where it's short, maybe some mixed grass prairie, but places that you just do not think when you're there, you kind of get that feeling like, man, am I is this like some kind of a snipe hunt here? Like there's deer in here, and sure enough, they're thriving on even a much more arid, much shorter grass, and even competing with huge cattle herds that are out there too. They're still able to make a go of it. And so prairie and deer, we don't really think of it this way, but historically it's hand in glove. They're an animal of the prairie. Now, certainly they're a creature of the edge. So those wetlands that I talked about, those oak savannas, the forests, and actually, ironically, I think it historically, Iowa is believed to have been about 5% forested, and that we're still around that today. And so I wonder, okay, where do we have forests today that we didn't back then? And I think probably a lot of the places where we do still have forest, there's still forest there today. But you do need that edge for deer to really thrive. But prairies were definitely a part of how they survived. And then taking it back to shed hunting. Whenever I'm shed hunting, I get real excited when I see a little bit of timber with a big old south-facing sloped prairie, and that's where I'm going to be. That's where I'm going to be heading first.
Yeah, Nick, what do you? I know you guys have a lot of different customers. You guys, market to a wide swath of different types of buyers. But when somebody comes to you who has this wildlife perspective and they care about deer and critters like that, how do you explain it to them? Why why native grasses and forbs and flowers, why that might be something they should incorporate into their management?
Well, I want to be really clear. As a non-deer hunter, I will never change their mind. But sometimes I use two little words that help change their mind. I say the words, Skip Sly said. Our mutual friend Skip Sly. And usually if he says something, it turns out to be pretty good for the whitetail. But in all seriousness, if they already understand, they get it, and I just guide them through different forbs that whitetail are known to kind of concentrate, select on. But if not, I use the metaphor of a Jenga tower pretty often. And I just tell them, us, whitetail deer, bison used to be there. We're kind of all at the top of this Jenga tower. And you can pull out just when you're playing Jenga, you can pull out a piece or two at a time. It's okay. That's fine. But you pull out enough pieces, you get rid of enough diversity, the whole thing comes tumbling down. Maybe there's a few bricks at the bottom that last, but those aren't whitetail deer, and it's not us. It's like crabgrass, cockroaches, and cottontail bunnies. Those are the only things that are going to be around. And so when you start walking through there, and I say, hey, by the way, if you're doing 40 acres of this prairie for your whitetail, I hope you enjoy bird hunting as well, because you're going to get a lot of those out there. Or there's a gentleman that and now he put hundreds of acres in, and he was able to do that. In Iowa, saw an elk, and so and just more than one occurrence of this. So to speak their language, I can't do it all the way, and to be able to connect with them on the things that they're able to talk about. But I do know that our ecosystem is a Jenga tower, and whitetail deer are in that just as much as any others. And habitat, those are kind of the big words, right? Habitat. So is habitat made out of miscanthus? Is it made out of just straight switchgrass? I would argue not. There's some utility when you're hunting there. I know they make screens and things like that. Not totally against those, making a screen with switchgrass. But if you're wanting habitat, if you're wanting to find places that people are bedding, or whitetail are bedding, then you're going to want that diversity. And if you want them traveling through all year round, now we're talking about having the diversity of different forbs that bloom during different periods, and different height grass coming up at different times. And now we've got a whole conversation where it's very livable for most of the year for the whitetail.
Yeah. I love that Jenga analogy. That's a great one. Can you speak to a little bit, can you paint that picture a little bit more about how all the other Jenga pieces benefit from these types of ecosystems? Because you guys just pointed out, like, there's a lot of ways this directly helps deer. But of course, then, if you start to understand that the entire Jenga tower matters, then that also means that the upland birds matter, and that means the turkeys matter, and that means that the butterflies and the songbirds and the ants and the cottontails and all of that probably matters too. And from everything I've learned over the years, it seems like all of those species and many, many others benefit from this habitat. But can you help us understand that in more detail? Because you guys are masters of this world in a way that I'm just not.
Oh, thanks. Well, I would first start by even taking a step back and saying diversity is just what it takes to be healthy. For instance, at our office, Kenton and I are not organized at all, but we desperately need someone in the office that's organized. We got to have people thinking different things. And Kenton and I are arguing about stuff all the time about how we want to do business or what new species we want to grow. And that creates a much stronger work ecosystem. It's just a principle of life. So now let's take that and put it in with prairie. There are species, they're called hemiparasites, that literally can only grow on other species, and they zap these other species of their nutrients, and that's the only way. Bastard toeflax, a real name of a plant, can only grow.
Watch your mouth.
Yeah,
it's a family show, Nick.
Yeah, sorry, but it likes to grow on sedges, and there's a few other things. It needs that ecosystem, that diversity in there. And if you don't have diversity of, let's say, your forbs, especially your legume forbs, well, big blue stem will get in there, it'll totally dominate, and then it'll zap itself dry and dead, and it will actually allow other woody encroachment, invasive woody encroachment, more than it would have otherwise, because it doesn't have the nitrogen from the legumes to be able to boost the grass right there. So there are, I would dare say, thousands or millions of relationships of plants to plants that are required for the ecosystem. That's just at the flora base. Now let's move to the fauna. I mean, big blue stem was carried here a little bit by wind, but they think probably mostly by hide. It came from the East Coast all the way to the Midwest. It was carried by hide. There are some species that really struggle to break dormancy if they're not eaten by birds, right? And so you start adding all of these things together, again, thousands or millions of relationships between flora and fauna. And now you start taking away enough of those Jenga pieces, and the other Jenga pieces can't exist. And, in the Midwest, we're privileged with some of the greatest soil in the world. There's only two other places on Earth that compare. One's in Ukraine, coincidentally enough, and one is in South America, where they're also growing a lot of corn. And that was because of two major components. It was the glaciers and the prairie, and the diversity that came with the prairie, and the worms that came because of the diversity of the prairie. And you dug up this really rich black soil that we as a Midwest have sustenance off of. Not, I mean, just food, even economically. And so there's all these things that go together. And if you take away too many of them, you start losing all of them.
Would you add anything to that, Kent?
I think Nick did a really nice job there summing it up. But yeah, diversity, you think of whether you're talking about the Jenga tower model or even just what we know about all ecosystems there, or even I think probably the best. So I used to be a biology teacher, and I'd like it where you could take different sections of biology and use a term or an illustration that transfers across to other studies within life sciences. So to me, I like to compare an ecosystem with like genetics, right? When you look at the science of genetics, you want the most individuals in a population that have a different set of genetic traits, because then you have what we call a deeper gene pool, right? You have more traits available among those individuals, so that if there's some kind of disturbance to the environment that these organisms are living in, they can absorb that disturbance and roll with the punches through time. They can stick around. And it's really a similar illustration within ecology. The more components you have, the more you can absorb those blows. And to continue with Nick's Jenga model, which he's playing it down right now. He is just doing victory laps in his brain. He's been talking to me about this Jenga tower metaphor for years.
Every time I get asked to speak in place, it's like the easiest way to communicate.
That's what his name will be on someday. Well, since you're aging so much faster than me, Nicholas, I will actually your headstone. I'll make it look like a Jenga tower. But the point is though that some of those Jenga pieces are gone and we can't get them back. And from a prairie reconstruction standpoint, we see that just in putting together a mix. Now, something I'll give Nicholas a lot of credit for, he designs our mixes, our seed mixes. He works his tail off to find as many species as he can put into a mix without the mix becoming unaffordable to your average consumer, right? And some people, they come to you and say, no matter the cost, give me the best you got. But a lot of the prairie acres we see going back onto the map, let's be honest, it's a old farmer who decided he was going to enroll some acres into CRP, and he's got some level of care in it turning out to be a good finished prairie. But a lot of times money is the biggest factor, right? And so Nick tries to create value, not just for the people who are willing to show up with, a fat wallet, but for people who want to just do the bare minimum, because he's trying to get as many of those Jenga pieces back into the tower as possible. But even still, compared to what these prairies were in their original state, a lot of times it pales in comparison to what all was there. So it is important to recognize what can be there, what was there, and what we can't replace, but we need to try and compensate in other ways because of all those different benefits that Nicholas talked about.
I heard you say, Nicholas, once that you almost get more excited when you hear about like a small landowner planting your guys' seed, because they can focus on like nurturing it and actually identifying like, oh yeah, this species is doing well, and making sure that this species is there, while someone who's planted hundreds of acres could never really keep tabs on all these different such and such hogwort or whatever. There's probably not a hogwort.
I like that. I think there should be a hogwarts mix.
But I think what came out of that when I was listening to you is like how much you actually cared about getting this prairie like back on the landscape, getting these native species back out there, above and beyond just the business for you. It was more like a calling. Like you want to see these species flourishing out there. Above and beyond just the practical side of it, why do you care so much about that?
About diversity, or about people caring about their CRP or their prairie planting?
Their finished prairie.
About seeing that come to life on the landscape. Why are you actually genuinely personally excited when you see like, oh, this person is nurturing this species and it's actually working and this prairie is actually out there? Um,
Man,
it just seems like it's more than just, oh yeah, I want to see my customers succeed so they buy more from me.
yeah. Well, that is a good question, and I'd say there's probably three major parts to it that kind of have compounded and have been sitting in my brain for the past several years. But I went to Bible school, studied Bible and counseling, went to Bethel School in Redding, California. Redding, California, man, that's the place to be. That the mountains that surround it on three sides, man. Iowa's very different. So I'm moved back to Iowa. But what they taught us at that school was contentment. That was a big deal. They had a lot of slogans around contentment and being thankful for what you have. And when you see prairie, not a lot of money. There's not a lot of gain to be had out of prairie, other than beauty that comes out of deep satisfaction in your soul. And I really care about humans and the state of human souls, and are they at peace? Are they not at peace? That matters to me a lot, me and my friends. And so that would be piece number one. Piece number two is that it is a tragedy to me how much we consider ourselves the lords of the land and not serving the land. Our mutual friend Doug Duran, he says this. What I know what the hunter gets. I know what the landowner. I know what the whitetail get. But what does the land get? You know, who's actually helping the land? And that really struck me. And just like, can I care about something that could never give me anything material gain back? Can I do that? And then the third piece is just like our longevity here in the Midwest. There's political forces at play and all these things, but can we set aside some acres to allow wildlife to live so our own health and the land's health can flourish? And I understand that that's a very complicated, difficult question that deals with a lot of different people, a lot of different interest groups. But just on a macro level, I would love to see us be able to decide as a society we care about this and what our futures. And I mean, in Iowa specifically, our kids are leaving. I mean, they're going to Michigan, they're going to Colorado, maybe going to Kansas City, but they're usually going further than that. And I don't want to see Iowa die away just because we decided, it wasn't worth having any acres around. We ripped it all up. I'd love to see some of it put back down. So you put those three things together, and when I see someone excited about a prairie, they just feel like a whole person. They just seem real. They're able to connect with things more than their phone, and I really, really appreciate that. And my wife and I, we have these phoneless walks. Right, we'll go out. We got a big lake near us, and we'll just go walk around. Just make sure you don't have your phone. And a lot of times I really wrestle on my inside. I'm like, oh, I want to listen to something. I need to check my email. I'm worried that, and then about 30, 45 minutes in, you start to feel this peace come over you. And I think we don't have that as much as I would like us to, including myself. And so when it comes to prairie represents a lot more than just the ecology to me. And I'm willing to fight for, hills I'm willing to die on.
Yeah. There's a lot there. And I obviously don't have as deep of a connection as you guys have to it, but certainly in my more fleeting experiences in grasslands, on the Great Plains, in prairie ecosystems, it's undeniable. The abundance of life there, the tranquility available there, the restorative properties of those landscapes. I think a lot of people, recognize the ocean maybe as being one of those kinds of landscapes that can restore you. But I think grasslands in many cases, like they're a sea of grass. I think they can almost have the same kind of effect when you stand out there amidst, the waves of wind rippling a grassland or a prairie patch. And in many cases, in some of these bigger landscapes where you can really see, that's a pretty special place. And one of the things that I've noticed when I've been on, truly flourishing native prairie ecosystems is that it's undeniable that there's something else going on. There's something different. Like when you're in a cool season grass field, which is a lot of what I have around where I live, it's just kind of like a dank, low jungle. And then when you're in an area where there's native species and diversity, it literally sounds different. It literally smells different. It obviously looks different. You can feel it all around you. And a big part of that is all of these things flittering and fluttering around you and buzzing and nipping and biting and crawling and creeping.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bugs. There's a lot of birds flying all around. There's a lot of pollination happening. And my good friend and co-host, Tony Peterson, God bless him, is always giving me a hard time talking about pollinators. He thinks I'm a big nerd for pollinators. And I'm hoping one of you would be willing to volunteer to help make the case to Tony that pollinators that benefit so much from native grasslands and wildflower patches and the prairie ecosystem. Can you tell Tony why it's okay to be a fan of pollinators and why they're pretty good for deer hunters and deer hunting and the wider world? Can somebody please make that case for me? I'll let you guys fight amongst yourselves.
I got to say, Mark, I have an answer for you on this one because I loved one of your comebacks. This was a couple years ago when I still can't believe you had the courage to do this, but you had Dan Johnson and Tony on there at the same time.
Yeah.
You've done it since. But it was a super entertaining episode. But I remember one of Tony's questions was, he was making fun of like your love for reading versus your love for pollinators, I think. And he said, all right, Mark, you have to choose. Are we going to burn down all the prairies, or are we going to burn down all your favorite bookstores? and if Tony knew anything, if he knew a dang thing about prairie, he wouldn't ask you that question because it's so obvious, right? Burn the prairies because they need it.
Burn the prairies.
Go ahead. I actually got into a Thanksgiving ending type of argument with a relative once, and they started screaming
Ken
at
does
me.
that.
It's
kind of a yearly tradition for him.
It's just keeps things interesting, right? And they started screaming at me and yelled, "What do you think? Well, how would you feel if they burned all the prairies down?" And I just kind of got that irritating smile on my face. Go ahead, baby. But anyways,
make my day.
That's right. Go ahead, make my day. So the reason anyone should care about pollinators is, I mean, why should you care about field mice? Why should you care about the orangutans in the part of the world? I don't even know where I think they're a South American ape, aren't they? No, yeah. Are they in the Congo?
Like Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia. Okay, I'm not up on my my primate
scariest,
science, but
that's okay.
That's okay. Scariest monkeys. Yeah,
but sure. Why should we care about any of those things? And there's something about life that's just different than not life, right? An ecosystem is made up of biotic and abiotic factors and how they exchange matter and energy between them, right? But there's something about life that is just different, And so you have that level right there, but that's not going to convince a guy like Tony. A guy like Tony is going to be more pragmatic, I would assume. I've never met Tony, but I've heard him a few times on his different shows. From a human standpoint, somebody, I don't know who it was, that maybe is like the Center for a Livable Future or something like that. Somebody calculated that 1 in 3 bites of food depend on pollination in a human diet. 1 in 3 bites of food. So that would be a pretty pragmatic standpoint. From a hunting standpoint, a lot of the different species of plants that whitetails need, they, in order to produce seed, they need pollination to take place in between the different plants. And there are a lot of plants that'll self-pollinate, but the problem with that, going back to what we were talking about genetics earlier, is then you're just having clones over and over again, and you're allowing more fragility to enter into that ecosystem, so that when that disturbance comes, which it always does, right? Sometimes it's a big flooding season, or sometimes it's a freaking meteorite that hits the planet and wipes out, half the life. But whatever that disturbance is going to be, we survive it by having more genetic diversity. And so when you think of then to extrapolate that to a super endangered ecosystem, which would be the tallgrass prairie. The tallgrass prairie is just as endangered as any other ecosystem on the planet, I believe, or at least as endangered as the tropical rainforest. And as we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, whitetails and prairie, they go together. And now they are surviving on increasingly smaller amounts of that prairie, and they have so far been able to roll with the punches. But things have changed. Iowa, EHD is such a buzzword, and I'm going to get you some nasty comments here. Someone's going to call me a crackhead. I've already been called that once today, so I'm used to it. But what we've been seeing with EHD, this is just me hypothesizing here. I'm just spitballing. But what we've been seeing is just an increasing prevalence maybe. And there's not really a reason for me to hope that it's going to ever get much better here in Iowa. I know it hasn't, from what I've heard, it wasn't always here in Iowa. It's something within the last 50 to 100 years, I believe, that it's really started to show up here. But we have been having years and years of drought. Now, this last year, thankfully, we got a break from that. But before that, it was 4 straight years of drought. And what do you know? 2 terrible years of EHD in the middle of that. We've seen our growing zones shift north. There's less rain, more dry days, and just these greater impacts that I really think are starting to impact deer hunting. And now I'm hopeful. There was a terrible year of EHD in 2012 in southwest Iowa, and the deer bounced back for a while. But now here again, it was basically 11 years later, 2023, we had a terrible year of EHD again. And then 2024, another bad year of EHD. And if we're getting that every 10 years, and we figure that a trophy whitetail is a deer that is 5.5 years or older, you're only getting 2 cycles of deer before the population is totally slammed again by EHD. And if that's what the new normal is going to be, I don't think that our best days of deer hunting are ahead of us. And something that I would be interested in is something that's going to make the landscape more how would you say it? More useful for holding water, right? Something that's going to make better use of the water that's here. We know field tile doesn't. Yeah, right. We know field tile doesn't help with that. We're losing a lot of our groundwater as fast as it can collect below the surface. And something that does, though, is living tissue, living plant tissue, and not just above ground, because we do get that with corn. Corn is a grass; it's an annual grass, and it holds moisture, above ground until it senesces and then dies and crisps up and loses its water. But living roots are going to store a lot of that water below the surface, year round, and so. Just from a standpoint of how do we make deer hunting better? Well, I think that, again, I'm hypothesizing on some of that, but a lot of that is well-known truth that prairies hold more water, and pollinating species make prairies function and make them last. And then, you have the whole nutrition side of it, whether that be for humans or for wildlife, including the animals that we love to chase, deer, turkeys, pheasants, whatever else.
Yeah, you make a really good point, which is that, and this isn't something that I had thought ahead of this, but it's actually one of the strongest cases, I think, for deer hunters to think about adding more of this kind of grassland prairie habitat. It's the fact that, for so many folks, traditional deer land management has meant food plots, food plots, a lot of annual food plots.
Yeah.
A lot of monoculture, single species food plots, right? A lot of, big buck on a bag kind of stuff. And in a new normal in which extreme drought, frequent drought is just kind of becoming what we have now. It seems like every year or very frequently. Those kinds of management practices, annual food plots, monoculture food plots, those become really risky. If your whole deer hunting plan depends on that, I think a lot of people last year saw that. A lot of folks thought they were going to put in a late season food plot. They're going to plant something in August, early September, and there was no rain. None. I've never had a worse food plot year in 20 years than last year. And the year before that, I thought was the worst. And the year or two before that, I thought that was the worst. And so becoming more and more and more, you're hearing stories like this where unless you're incredibly rich and you can go out there and irrigate your food plots somehow, it's not something you can depend on as much as you used to. A perennial grassland ecosystem, though, to your point, that's something you can hang your hat on. And that's more resilient, maybe more, it sounds like obviously more drought resistant, tolerant. Right. It's the kind of thing that can provide wildlife habitat that does not require you going in there and replanting every year and, possibly sucking out more of the moisture with traditional tillage or things like that. So yeah, that's a really interesting point that makes a lot of sense. Nicolas, is there anything you would add on the pollinator thing specifically before I kind of take a pivot?
Just two fragile arguments that Judd McCollum, if you know that guy's awesome, and lives out in Illinois. And he said that he was reading a paper, like a officially posted paper that argued that it was like 60% of the water intake of deer in the dead of summer, if they have the choice, is from forbs, from native forbs. Now, native forbs are thriving in June, July into August, and they're not. Most of them aren't drying out yet. They're holding a lot of moisture, and so I could see that argument being true. I've never read the paper myself.
No, it is true. It is true that it's known that deer get the majority of their moisture from their diet, and not just from. They do go and drink from a creek or drink from a pond or whatever, but they do get during the growing season for plants. They get the majority of their water that way.
And the argument Judd was making to me was that if that is what they are choosing, that probably is their instinct realizing what has more nutrition in it. So if you're a trophy hunter, then more nutrition means bigger bucks, healthier herd. And so I would add that in there, that the nutritional value adds in the middle that you just can't get you don't have them without pollinators. Specifically, actually, like Ohio spiderwort and some of the ones that hold a lot more water, these are, or foxglove pentstemon, these are actually ones that only get pollinated by native pollinators. So, yeah.
Interesting. So one last kind of, I don't know, it's not necessarily philosophical, but another one of these, I guess, just like why questions. Within the habitat world, there are some folks who are, they might call them pragmatists, and they'll say, well, if a plant does a job, I'm okay with it, whether it's native or non-native. And there's other folks, we might call them purists, who would say, well, no, natives, because natives are supposed to be here, non-natives aren't supposed to be here, and then they have their reasons. Could one of you give me a take on why you guys believe that natives are more beneficial to have in the landscape, worth managing for, worth planting, worth, trying to get rid of those invasives and promote the growth of natives? There's some folks that this is, just something they're not willing to dive into. So I'm curious if one of you guys would be willing to give me a perspective on that before we kind of get into the how to.
Yeah,
sure.
Kent will have more after this, but two things that I tend to share with people is that we've been promised about 20 times over the past 8 decades that this brought in ornamental species will not be invasive. And we were wrong. Yeah. Every single one of those, even one, like, no, don't worry, the seed's sterile. Or there's no seed on this one. You do not have to worry about this. And so I would love to say, like, Miscanthus is a really popular one. I would love to say that they're right because I see how much of it goes in. I would love to think, well, that's never going anywhere. But the same thing was said about the pampas grass. And when I'm in the backwoods somewhere planting for someone's CRP field, you have no idea how many times that just lines the ditches all the way for like miles. So I'd love to say that's true. It just hasn't been the case yet, and it is not something I'm willing to put my faith in up to this point. Plants are unbelievably resilient. They have lasted this long through evolution because they are so resilient. They're going to figure it out. They figure it out. And then the other argument I would add is the Jenga tower. Sometimes, and this is actually why a pheasant is the Hoksey Native Seeds logo. Pheasants are not native, but they represent. We've changed the landscape. We've brought in something that's not native, and it made a good home. So it kind of recognizes for us, we're never going back 100% to what was, but it needs to make sense and it needs to be balanced and it needs to be a healthy ecosystem. And pheasants, when we have healthy ecosystems that could like support bison, which used to be here, turns out that's actually pretty good for pheasants as well. So that's why we use pheasants. One of the two major reasons we use pheasants for our logo. But when going back to this Jenga tower, sometimes bringing in something like an invasive version of Reed's canary or brome, it's like putting a big weight on the top of that Jenga tower. And what I mean by that is the tower can't support it and has no checks and balances for this species. So this species, it starts as a little block and then it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And all of a sudden it's a 45-pound dumbbell sitting on the Jenga tower. Jenga tower is hardly holding it together. And in a lot of places for acres and acres and acres and acres, it doesn't fit at all. And now, I mean, I would challenge anybody to go to a brome field versus a native prairie planting, even a bad native prairie planting, and tell me the difference in diversity of flora and fauna. It'd be astounding. So those are my first two, but I know Kent's got strong feelings on it.
Just playing off what Nicolas said there. I can't imagine there being a single listener right now who, if you said you can snap your fingers and all of that reed canary monoculture, all of that smooth brome monoculture, all of the bush honeysuckle, autumn olive, buckthorn monoculture that we have in Whitetail USA, if you could snap your fingers and restore it to its native diverse status, who would say no? We would. I mean, just imagine the difference what that would mean for how many deer could be. The carrying capacity for deer in Whitetail USA would jump significantly. And so I think right there illustrates, a good answer or a good example to play out what Nicolas is talking about there. And I actually heard you ask Kyle Leibarger, another mutual friend of ours, about this. Must have been 2 or 3 years ago.
A few years ago, yeah. And
he had a really good answer. Because some of those things, they really don't spread too bad. Miscanthus, as long as you are willing to be actively managing it, I don't think you do have to fear a ton of it, escaping very far, right? It spreads right on a rhizome. But if you're cutting it back or, maybe going in there with an excavator every now and then and ripping it up a little bit, you can keep it at bay. But the second you're out of the picture and someone who cares about it less than you and is less attentive to the chores that keep it where you wanted it as you're screened to your stand or whatever, it's going to stay on the land. And Kyle made the point of, if 50 years from now we see all these properties that used to be owned by avid deer hunters, and they're all loaded with giant miscanthus or Egyptian wheat or whatever else, Phragmites, and somebody goes, "Grandpa, what's with all the giant miscanthus over there?" And he says, "Oh, deer hunters used to be really into that." Man, what a bad mark on our resume as people who claim to care about the land to be strapping a future generation with another ecological problem. So,
yeah, I mean, so much of it comes down to the work that goes into managing it. right? Like you mentioned earlier how if you could snap your fingers and all the invasive, non-native autumn olive and honeysuckle and cedar trees or whatever it might be, if we could snap our fingers and all that was gone, who wouldn't take that? And yeah, everyone would
Right.
take it. Problem is to actually do the work to get rid of that stuff. It's a lot of work. It's a
Yeah.
lot of time. It's a lot of energy. And some people are like the cost benefit analysis for them, they're not seeing it.
Yeah.
But to your point, I would say that the cost or the benefits far outweigh the costs. But there's people who are constantly saying, "Well, is it worth it? Is it not worth it?" And I can't remember where I picked this up, but one of the things that also drove this home for me, the Jenga analogy again works really, really well. But then there's also uh, there's all these different specialist connections. Like an ecosystem is like all of these different threads, all interwoven and all connected from this piece to that piece and all the other. And when species co-evolve, they very often develop unique relationships from plant to bug or bug to bird or bird to plant. And very oftentimes those are unique, special, important connections that, like puzzle pieces fit perfectly together. Now, if you bring in a non-native species, maybe it fills the blank spot in the dirt and it can grow there just fine. But this puzzle piece now does not match up with that native bird that lived there or that native bug that lived there. It's not going to, that connection won't work anymore. And so if you disconnect all the threads of this tapestry, again, kind of like pulling out pieces of the Jenga, if you were to snip all these different threads across the tapestry, which are these specialized connections between native co-evolving species, all of a sudden that tapestry falls apart and you have relationships that aren't working anymore. You have processes that aren't working anymore. And so again, it's, all these things are connected. All these things do matter.
100%.
But it does take time. It does take energy. It does take work. And that's what I want to talk about next is the work. If people want to put some of this on the ground, if people want to have some native prairie strips, or if people want to take what was an old field and convert it to a native grassland, or if somebody was planting some annual food plots and they've gotten sick of the fact that drought makes it a waste of time every other year, every 3 years, and instead they want to put in a perennial kind of cover/food mix or something like that. They've gotten to the point where they want to try something different, or they at least want to add some diversity to their other food plot stuff. If that's the boat they're in here today, what I would love for you guys to do is walk me through the process of how to do that for a small landowner, but not the actual process of like, do this, do this, do this. Because anyone can go online and get the basic instructions for how to plant a native prairie strip or something like that. What I would like you to do is walk through the common mistakes or what people miss with the conventional wisdom typically. For someone who's trying to plant an acre prairie, trying to put in 2-acre strips or something like that for the first time, what does the conventional wisdom or the typical 1, 2, 3 steps, what do they miss in that? Where do most people make a mistake or hit a roadblock or bump their head up against the wall and fail, or think they've failed and don't want to do this anymore, or say this prairie sucks, I'm never gonna try this again, I'm converting it back to brassicas or whatever it is. Kent, maybe I'll let you start here if you want with a few of the things that you have heard about over the years or have seen yourself that are a few of those common stumbling blocks. So maybe you can briefly kind of address what some of those steps are that somebody has to take. But I'm most interested in what most people don't think about. What is that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. You could basically break it up into this: prep, plant, maintain. All those have to go into it, right? But the prep part is just so important. The other two, of course, they have their own little nuances, which we'll talk about. But the prep phase is one that, and honestly, our founder Carol, who's been growing prairie for 40 years before he passed away this last July, he would talk about this all the time. You need to get a double kill before you plant. And a lot of, historically people thought, oh, I got this spot in my yard, I'll just spray it down and then I'll plant. And then they'd have all this, non-native seed bank come roaring back now that the Kentucky bluegrass is out of the way and isn't shading the ground and using the resources. And so getting a proper kill, and a double kill is the easy way to say that, but I'd also encourage people to think of it from a standpoint of cool season versus warm season kills. And so this is where guys who love food plotting are going to like me. It's the best case scenario, in my opinion, for planting a prairie, planting a reconstructed prairie. It's different if you're maintaining a ground that might have a remnant seed bank. And I'll just say this right away: if you have a farm that's mostly old pasture, it's very hilly, almost impossible to have been farmed, there's a good chance that it never was significantly tilled. Most prairies could handle one, maybe one hard plow up that may have happened in their history. But usually what would have happened on those kinds of acres, somebody tried farming it and they're like, oh, good grief, the erosion, the horse could about killed the horse trying to drag a plow up that hill, or trying to harvest it was a nightmare or whatever. It flooded. If it's had a history of being old pasture, there's probably a lot of remnant prairie plants already there that you aren't seeing that are getting shaded out, or just a seed bank that's still there. And so that's a little bit different situation. But if you're in a place like Iowa or southern Michigan or southern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, Illinois, much of the heart of whitetail country, right? If you're in one of those areas, then it probably has been cropped for years. And those areas, they're the easiest to do a prairie into, because they've been planted with Roundup Ready corn and soybeans for years, and they've been the weeds have been taken care of. So if you can plant into soybean ground, that's usually your best, right? It's nice, smooth soil. And you've had both those cool season and warm season sprayings that have been taking place. Well, if you don't have that and you need to simulate it, then it might not be a bad idea to grow some Roundup Ready corn and soybeans on the area that you're envisioning being your prairie a few years later, because then you're going to still get something out of those acres that's going to be useful to you as a hunter. And you're also going to be setting back all the non-native weeds and other pressures that you need to be out of the way for you to plant. And so that's what I would recommend from a hunting standpoint, just for the prep side of it. Then from a planting standpoint, the other main problem that a lot of people had historically, and thankfully the NRCS has come in and they give their planting recommendations to people, and they give a planting seed depth recommendation. I believe on the NRCS website, it says 1/4 of an inch or more shallow than that. So a maximum depth of 1/4 of an inch. The vast majority of prairie species, they certainly cannot handle more than that. They just simply won't germinate. They'll stay dormant in the soil column. And so you need to have a seeding method that seeds right at the surface or just scratches the surface and just gets more so incorporated with the surface. And so, a lot of people, they get the cart before the horse, right? And they get excited. They don't know about the prairie stuff yet, but man, they saw a drill on a good deal at a trade show, and they want that drill, and they know how to spend money. They don't know how to plant a prairie yet, and they go and they buy the drill and then let it resolve itself later, and then they start planting too deep, and then their prairie just never comes up well. So start by getting your knowledge on what you're going to be planting. It's going to be prairie. It's got to be really, we use the rule of 1/8 of an inch or at max depth. And so plant real shallow like that. And, there's a seeding rate. If you're buying from a reputable seed dealer, they're going to give you seed tags that provide an appropriate seeding rate. In Iowa, the CRP standard is 40 seeds per square foot. Illinois is 20 seeds per square foot. So, the general rule is, there is a maximum, but you don't want to go too heavy. But, if you can be 40 to, what did Justin Meisen say, Nicholas? Did he give you a number? Like if he had his perfect world, this guy's like the prairie, researcher. He's at
He's the
University
guy.
of Northern Iowa Tallgrass Prairie Center. But he said, was it 80? If he could get 80,
dude, he gave the classic scientific answer. He's like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
But it depends on the species. But if I'm recommending something for someone's yard, a big field is different because it's just easier. But if someone's yard, we do 60. We try and sell 60 seeds a square foot.
You want a real high,
an acre or less, yeah.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of things those seeds have to survive to make it to germination. And then I would add on to that with planting, if you can, do a dormant season planting. A lot of the flowers, a lot of the forbs, the things that we're most excited to see, whether we're a deer hunter or a little old lady bird watcher, are the flowers. And a lot of those flowers, they need a period of cold stratification. And so to break their dormancy in the next, or in some cases, next 2 growing seasons. But most flowers need at least 10 days of cold stratification, many of which need 30 or even 60 days of cold stratification. So if you can plant at our latitude here in South Central Iowa, that November timeframe is about perfect. That's when Justin Meisen, the guy we were just talking about, that's his ideal month. Get it on the ground then and let it overwinter. And then comes, of course, the maintenance. And maintenance is largely done through mowing. But you can't, if this goes for people who just apply chemicals to do all their maintenance, right? Whether they're spot spraying or they're, doing a big broadcast, with a, giant spray or something. A big part of herbicide usage is scouting beforehand, right? You need to go out there and see, what weed problems do I have? And I think when people do that, then comes the real hard part. You might have to get out a shovel. You might have to get out a garden hoe. You might have to get out a rake. You might have to get out a little pump jug of Roundup or something and go and hit that targeted problem. The classic is Canada thistle, right? And you might have to get a little pump jug of some Duracor and go out there or some Milestone or something and hammer that. But you got to stay on top of it with the maintenance. Otherwise, some of those other problems that choke out a prairie can begin to invade.
Wow.
Would you add anything to that, Nicholas?
I would just add that we should habituate our minds to burning prairies. And there's also,
how could I forget?
There's the 20 acre, or people have 20 acres of timber right next to it. It doesn't mean your prairie doesn't need to be burned. And there used to be a recommendation of disking, do like a 4 or 5 year. Do not do that. That is not good for your prairie. I don't know every time I ask at the state level, they're like, yeah, we don't really know who recommends. I think someone knows. They're just not willing to out everyone.
Yeah.
But, and then the other thing I would say is if you're doing a yard specifically and you've got turf grass, turn that 2 springs into 3 springs. You really need 3 springs. And the reason is you need 2 cool season springs and you need a warm season spring, because all this crabgrass and other stuff that's being choked out by your Kentucky bluegrass, it will come in. And that stuff is particularly harmful for prairie or pollinator patches and stuff like that, because it thatches and it grows out and it does a really good job shading and choking, right? If you have a little bit of foxtail or something, that's whatever. That's not going to outlast the prairie with good maintenance. But that crabgrass or the other things that crawl along the ground that create that cover, that will cause an issue.
And there are some non-chemical ways too to prep the ground. You can. I have a nice prairie in my yard. I mean, it still needs some maintenance, but I cleared about a 5,000 square foot area with just giant silage tarps. I just staked them down, threw a bunch of pallets on them and T-posts and things like that to weigh them down through the winds of Europe whipping across Iowa. And after enough weeks of that, it turned it into dirt, and I got, of course, multiple killings like Nicholas talked about. But I know a lot of people are sensitive to, they don't want to use pesticides. I don't blame them. I hate that is the one part of my job I like the least, is when I have to get out the pesticides. But there are other options out there.
Were you gonna add anything else, Nicholas? I feel like you were kind of rolling on another thing there, or no?
No, those were the two. Was mentally prepare yourself for fire, and then the 3 spray-ins on the yard. Yeah, those are ones that cause headaches for people that I get a lot of phone calls about.
Okay, so one thing that deer hunters do know and are excited about talking about that will be relevant to this conversation is actually picking seeds. That's one thing they always love to talk about. Is like, give me the right food plot seed. What bag should I buy? What mix should I buy, etc. And you guys have this very interesting set of products that you guys sell. You have a whitetail mix, habitat mix, and then you have a perennial food plot mix. But it's using like native forb species, flower species, some grass species, and some of those. It's a very interesting alternative to planting traditional food plots like we would usually think about. And I would love to understand, Nicholas, how you guys go about picking out what the right mix is for something like that. Like, what does your whitetail habitat mix achieve? What's the goal you're trying to achieve there? How do you do that in this kind of unique way? And I'd love to know about, as much as you're willing to talk about your specific product, because I think that's great. But I do know that it's only, native and appropriate for certain states, right? Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Missouri, Illinois, South Dakota, I think, right?
Great question.
So I want to make sure that I want to make sure that for people that live somewhere else, how do they go about using a similar framework to create the right mix for themselves? So I'm curious about the answer to those questions for the whitetail habitat mix, but then also the perennial food plot mix. So kind of a 2-part question there.
Nick's getting all excited right now. This is his world, man.
Man. I mean, you don't know how many hundreds or thousands of hours I spend on the phone on these kinds of conversations. But so I came up with the idea of the perennial food plot because I believe it was a gentleman named Steve I was talking to, was basically talking about how much like the deer seem to just come in and nibble all these different species in his pollinator mix. And I was like, I bet I didn't know anything about deer. I just know that sometimes they hate your car. And that's what I knew about deer. I knew that Iowa was a good place to hunt. I didn't know anything. I was like 22 years old. And I was like, well, I bet if I threw a mix in together like this. And so that's why I originally posted a mix for the perennial food plot on the website. And then honestly, through the podcast, have learned, and I just selfishly ask people, I've talked to Skip Sly about it. Hey, what do you see browsing? Judd McCollum, who I mentioned earlier, he's got large acres of prairie. Hey, what do you see them like great or browsing on? What are they picking out there? Dr. Mark Turner, people that just know what they're talking about and have spent a lot of time on the landscape. And then there's just general biology and speculation of, I know that this plant, the seeds are very large. In general, you can kind of break forbs into 2 groups of quality versus quantity. Usually the things later in the fall when they bloom, those are quantity species. And the reason you can tell is because they have millions of seeds in a pound, but they're a lot smaller, and their success rate, even if their germination tests high, their success rate is lower, versus legumes are almost always a much higher quality. But what does that mean? That means there's fewer seeds in there. That means the seeds have to be higher quality. That means they probably have more protein. They've got more nutrients in there. And so you start breaking that down, and plus what other people are saying they're seeing the deer graze on. And that was kind of my original. And then just, I've probably asked 100 times, what do you see your deer bed in? And then that's what I did for the habitat. I just threw those species in there, and then I added some other species that I know intermingle with those specific flora. And I put those out, and we've seen great success. And the truth is, Mark, like our mixes have like 80 or 90% overlap. Like most of the species are the same. It's just general prairie. And then there are some more expensive things that deer like. Round-headed bush clover, it's a little expensive, but deer like it. So we'll throw it in there. It's another one of those legumes. But there's a lot of overlap on a lot of our mixes. So we have a friend named Caleb. He planted a little 1/8 acre prairie, and 2 years in a row, he saw a buck out there. 1 year was tending
an urban prairie. Mark, he's had at least a 3.5-year-old buck tending a doe in his little 1,000 square foot
Love it.
prairie in his yard.
And
That's
that was
awesome.
just like a showy mix. That was one that was supposed to have really pretty flowers, but it's like there's so much overlap that in general, if you plant what is native and you get a lot of diversity, the whitetail will show up. Now, you're right. The mixes we have on our website are basically Iowa and states touching Iowa. But we get a lot of calls from elsewhere. I was just chatting with the guy from Georgia here a couple weeks ago. And usually I have a general feel for what species are good out there. And I will take your call and I will handle all of it. But I'm going to tell everyone listening right now, I'm going to call a seed provider in your area and I'm going to middleman it through them. So if you've got a really strong regional seed provider, call them and just ask for a pollinator mix or ask for a tall grass mix if you're in that area and you have the privilege of having tall grass prairie to be habitat. Now I know you get further west, the tall grass isn't really a thing as much out there. And so you're looking for different habitat, right? But if you are eastern Nebraska, South Dakota, or further east, you're looking at being able to have a mix to tall grass prairie. And the more forbs you have out there, the more there is for them to eat. Now, keep this in mind. You put a bunch of big blue and switchgrass and Indian grass in there, which people do for the habitat side. There are forbs that can handle that competition, but it's not the majority of them, right? Some of those include the prairie clovers, wild bergamot, black-eyed Susan could grow out of a rock. Several of the asters can handle that kind of competition. But if someone says, hey, it's mostly big blue stem, Indian, and switchgrass, and then I've got a list of these 60 other forbs, save your money. What you want to do is if you want a lot of those forbs, have a little bit of Indian grass, big blue stem, switchgrass, and then mostly little blue stem, blue grama, depending where you're at, prairie drop seed, rough drop seed, some of these shorter grass that allow the forbs to come in and flourish and compete. And then you'll have your whitetail out there, what Judd calls a full plate. He says they've got something almost all year round that they can go, and you're basically habitually training them to be in that field or to travel there and browse through there every single day. So those are what is going through our mind. But I want to be clear, there's not a lot of papers of like, these are the exact forbs that, whitetail eat during this time. There's a little bit of literature, and then it's mostly just who's been on the ground for years and years and who's been watching the deer.
So am I right that the whitetail habitat mix that you guys have is heavy on the tall grass, the big blue stem, what you mentioned there, lower
Exactly.
on the forbs? And then your food plot mix still has, it's the alternative, which is the heavier forbs, because we're really trying to keying on the food there, but then also still some of the prairie, some of the grass, some of the flowers as well, correct?
Yes, that is exactly right. And one more thing I would add, if you put big blue stem in a mix and you're not willing to do random burns or have something graze on it, and if you have enough of it, in 8 years, it'll all be big blue stem. But even if you only have a little bit, in 30 years, it'll all be big blue stem. Big blue stem had one competitor, well, maybe two if you count elk, but really one competitor throughout the evolution of the Midwest, and that was bison. It doesn't exist anymore. Cows love it, but do you really want your cows grazing in that area? And so that's why in our perennial food plot, there's just no big blue stem. I think there's no big blue stem or switchgrass. Indian grass is okay, some of that, but yeah, that's a
You heard
mistake.
it here first.
That
Bison no
over.
longer exists. Nick is
What is that what I said? They're all well. Aren't they all like they're all beefalo, right?
Is there a group of people that say Canada doesn't exist too, or something? I don't know.
There's people who say the Earth is flat, brother. I know that you've been going to those meetings.
People will say just about anything these days, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I love this idea, though. I love the idea of this, and it's a growing thing, like this messy field approach to wildlife habitat, where we used to love this is not just for wildlife, this is farming, right? Like, used to be clean field farming, right? And now I think people are getting, certain groups are getting okay with a messy field, and I think the same thing's happening within the hunting management side of things. And there's definitely been more and more interest in diverse blends, more and more folks talking about managing their soil carefully, no-till, et cetera, et cetera. But now I love this idea of now taking the next big step, which is like, let's add in a little bit of grass, let's add in some flowers, some native forbs. Let's get really crunchy with it and be like super natural.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be everywhere. Like this, you don't have to replace all of your traditional food plots with something like this. But I love the idea of this supplementing, this adding diversity, because you could still really benefit your whitetails in this way while also helping so many other things. And then it's, in the end, probably lower maintenance than constantly going in there every spring and summer and redoing your food plots over and over and over again with all of these inputs and all this chemical. It makes a lot of sense. So I love that approach.
I've heard
it's very
of
intriguing to me.
well-managed prairies, an afternoon or two per year, lasting well over 30 years. So in terms of like ROI on your food plot, that is definitely a possibility.
That's incredible. You, Nicolas, particularly, have mentioned this a couple different times. You've mentioned like backyard stuff. That's becoming more and more of a thing. Myself, here in our family, we've tried to add a couple different little pollinator patches in our yard. We've tried to lose a little bit of our regular lawn every year. We kind of give back a little bit more every single year, slowly adding to the native stuff and trying to manage that and improve that. You guys have some mixes for this. You've probably talked to a lot of people trying to do something like this. Can you address some of the common either little tricks that really help with that or mistakes that folks often run up against when it comes to trying to establish a little bit of a backyard prairie, a native prairie little patch in their garden, or they're converting their backyard or whatever? You mentioned a few things already, but I'd love to kind of look at this a little bit more focused and see if there's anything that you want to touch on.
Yeah. Well, we get a lot of questions. So we sell down to 500 square feet worth, in like little packets, and people ask for smaller. The problem with smaller is it gets tough to make sure all the different species you have in the mix actually get into that tiny bag of 100 square feet of, and so we kind of bottom out of that. It's like $40 or something for a 50 something different species to put in there. But there's a couple of things. One, if you have a really small area, 10 maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Plugs is not a bad option. It's more expensive, but it kind of balances between having a yard your HOA won't complain about and having that prairie, those natives on there. But if you're wanting to spread seed, make sure, and just like if you need to wait an extra year, it's okay. Make sure you eliminate the vegetation that's there. I had a guy tell me he did 5 sprayings on it, and I was like, great, that's you're not going to find any crabgrass in there. And then the other thing is we'll sell mixes like this, but it's not as common. Planting your forbs 1 year and then coming back and planting your grasses the next year. The reason is your grasses just are more aggressive. They get a better head start. Even if you take out big blue stem Indian and switchgrass, the tall grasses, even if you take those out, even the little blue stem, the rough drop seed can kind of come up a little bit faster than your forbs. And so giving your forbs an extra year head start, some of those forbs need 2 years of dormancy to even get through. It gives a little bit of an advantage, or even starting your forbs in the fall and then planting your grasses the next spring. That's a pretty good strategy. But I would say I'm adding a lot of details. For the most part, as long as you eliminate your vegetation, it's not that hard to get something to show up and look pretty. The big thing that 1 year I kept track of, it was 122 phone calls of just, hey, nothing showed up yet, right? The patience piece to it. So they say year 1, it sleeps, year 2, it creeps, and year 3, it leaps. But I would even argue that I tell people year 1, you're going to think I sold you sand. Year 2, you're going to think, wait, I paid for that? All right. And then year 3, it's going to look great. But there are species in there, some blazing stars, the cardinal flowers. Some of these, they don't like showing up first 2, 3, 4 years. Some of them will show up year 6, 7, 8. Gentian, things like this, they have a high number of coefficients. And so they come later. So patience is a really strong game, but it also brings a lot of delight when on year 6, you see something in a 200 square foot plot that you'd never seen before. It's a really cool feeling.
Well, they say what with trees, like the best time to plant a tree was yesterday.
Yeah.
But the next best time is today. Well, I think it's probably the same with a prairie, right? I mean, yeah, 100%. It takes some patience, but every day you wait is a day wasted.
That's right. Absolutely, man.
Kent, would you add anything on the backyard front?
No, just the importance of that maintenance and maybe also a little bit on planning. I mumble, I'm from Iowa, but planning meaning without the T in it. So if you're going to be able to burn this thing, you need to make sure that it's not too close to the house, not, preferably not right under the power lines or whatever, make sure it's because otherwise what'll happen is you just won't manage it how it needs to be managed. And you'll tell yourself when you're planting it, I'll figure it out. I'll get it, I'll get it burned. And then you're standing there with the box of matches in your hands. You're like, there ain't no way I'm lighting this thing on fire, And so, a little bit of good planning on what's going to be realistically manageable to you is critically important. Otherwise, what ends up happening to those prairies is eventually they go without the proper maintenance, and they just get mowed and seeded back down into some kind of turf grass. So you want it to be something that's going to stick around for the long haul. So a little bit of planning goes a long way.
Measure twice, cut once.
That's right.
Well, we've only just barely scratched the surface of a lot of these topics. I mean, this is really some very basic introductory into a lot of this. But you guys, I have to commend you. You guys have put together a really great resource with your podcast.
I appreciate that.
You do a great job with your social clips, getting those out there. I think that's really well done. I've learned really interesting little nuggets over the last handful of years following that. And then in the podcast, just a tremendous marketing mechanism for your business, I'll say. And then also great resource for anybody who wants to learn more. And it's not just about, the specifics of planting a prairie or planting native grasses or anything like that. You guys, I'm not telling you guys anything new, but to the folks listening, I've really appreciated, you guys explore a lot of conservation related issues, a lot of things related to the farming economy and small business owners and just lots of really fascinating stuff. I'm glad that my buddy recommended checking you guys out, because every time I drop in and listen to something, I find myself thinking, like, these guys are doing this well. There's a lot of podcasts out there, and I don't say that about a lot of them.
Wow,
you guys are
really
doing
high
it
praise, well. Mark. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And I want to give you guys an opportunity here real quick before we wrap it up to just let folks know where can they find your guys' work, both the content, and then also how can they connect with Hoksey and the seeds and maybe get some of your product in their hands. Would either one of you guys like to share that?
Yeah. Well, we have two different social medias. So we have Hoksey, Hoksey, Hoksey Native Seeds. I think it's on basically everything. And what we do there is we talk about what we have going on the farm, and we have little clips about that. Usually it's Kent's face. Although, Mark, you want to hear something kind of sad? We had 2 guest videos from 2 different people. They are 2 of by far the most watched videos we've ever had on the social account. And the only 2 that aren't,
off.
yeah, that aren't me, Kent, or Riley. It's just like, I just thought that was so funny. And then the other one is the Prairie Farm podcast. That one's also, I think you can watch the few months ago, we started posting them on YouTube as well, but otherwise the major platforms, the Prairie Farm podcast. And I want to give one more shout out. And my dad in the 80s went against farming and was made fun of by his neighbors to start a prairie farm. And he passed away this past summer from cancer that is not proven to be caused, but highly correlated with water quality issues, the exact thing he was fighting against. And I'm very grateful for him. And so every time I show my face publicly, I just want to commend him and I'm grateful to say he was a good dad and a good person behind the scenes as well. And so, I really want to commend him. And this is everything we're doing is possible because of this. And before anybody ever listened to our podcast, I bet he spent $50,000 on the podcast, believing in Kent and I, just going around interviewing these people for, a year and a half before probably a single listener came on. So we're very grateful to him.
That's incredible. And of course, very sorry for the loss, but also so impressed with your dad's story and what you guys have built and what he built and the mission that you guys seem to be on. It's inspiring. It's encouraging in a world where if you care about the natural world, if you care about native wildlife habitat, clean air, clean water, if you pay attention to it, you can recognize the fact there's a lot of wounds out there. Leopold said we live in a world of wounds once you kind of have eyes to see it. But work like the kind that you guys are doing gives me hope that we can address those wounds and we can make things better. So keep up the good work. I appreciate you guys, and thanks for being here on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
All right, and that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining me here on the podcast. I hope you learned a few things about native prairie habitat and ecosystems, native grasses, flowers, forbs, and how all of that can help you as a deer hunter. It can help your whitetail deer. It can help your turkeys, your pheasants, your grouse, your quail, your butterflies, your birds, your bunnies, all across the board. This is a good thing. I hope in your neck of the woods you can help put a little more of it on the ground. I certainly will be trying to do the same. So until next time, thank you for being here and stay wired to hunt.